Afternoon, everybody. We see our participants coming into our Zoom meeting for today. You are here with Austin Up. We are a nonprofit in the Austin, Texas area, and we help in many different areas, but one of them is helping people look for work. And really excited that you're here today. My name is Cindy Cummings. I'm a volunteer. All the volunteers are just on the board right now helping, aren't we, Chip? So we're making this happen. We have a great webinar today. We're so glad that you're all here. And let me just take a minute to introduce Chip Sampson. He's going to be talking today about the employment puzzle, which it is a puzzle, and he'll be helping us put everything together. So welcome, Chip. Let me go ahead and read your resume so everybody will know who you are. So Chip has more than 20 years of experience in the professional services and project team placement industry. During that time, he has developed long-term business relationships with a large number of employers and a network of contacts. Prior to that, he served 11 years in management roles over customer service and sales-focused companies in the music and audio industry. He currently serves as the Internship Committee Chair for the Austin Community College Continuing Education Vendor Advisory Board and on the Board of Directors for Austin Up. Thank you. And nonprofits focused on the quality of life issues for Austin residents. Self-described as a teacher and creator, he has developed a series of programs based around the employment puzzle and concepts designed to help job seekers put all their pieces together to more effectively reach their desired employment goals through a systematic approach with networking as a central principle. He has helped thousands of job seekers prepare and promote their credentials to potential employers. We are so happy that you're here, Chip, and let me just go over our format for today. Basically, you have some slides that you're going to share with us, and so we'll have you run through the slides first, and then when you're done with the slides, we're going to welcome people to come back on in video. They don't have to, and also in voice, and we'll have people ask questions at the very end. So if you were to look in your Zoom towards the very bottom, we have two areas. Well, it looks like I just have one. You have a chat area. So if you want to put your questions in there, I will be, as a moderator, will ask them. But if you want to ask your own questions, we welcome that too. Welcome, Chip. So tell us where you are today. Where is Chip today?
Thank you. Well, I'm in Galveston, Texas, and waiting, like, I think you guys had a big storm roll through last night, right? And
we really did, yeah.
The remnants of that have kind of drifted down south along in Houston and the coast, and I think we're expecting that this afternoon. So,
oh man,
not as severe as what you guys got from my understanding, but I hope
it was a big storm. But you know what? My trees and grass are so happy. But without further ado, Chip, I'm going to go off video. I will be here to coordinate, answer questions and things like that. But please just go on ahead and tell us about the employment puzzle. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining in, and I hope this is useful for everybody that's on here. You know, as Cindy said, there's a lot of material to cover here, and I will make these slides available if you want them after the fact. And it's probably easier if we kind of push questions to the end. So if you don't already have it, maybe grab a pen, a piece of paper, just so you can kind of write your questions down as we go through this material. I can do it at different speeds, but generally it takes about 40-45 minutes to deliver, and then we'll have 15 minutes or so for questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up and share my screen. And I think I'm going to, yeah, good. It's in presenter mode and everything. Awesome. Can everyone can see the screen, right? The employment puzzle. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I titled this an effective guide to finding your job, because, you know, if you're going to look for work, what's important that you get a job you want, that you would like to do. So it is your job search. We'll kind of bounce back and forth between how you focus that, because it's equally important to focus on what it is that the company wants and what value you bring to them. So we'll talk through these concepts and ideas. But it came about as a puzzle because everybody's put together a puzzle before, and you understand there's several pieces and you have to line them up and fill in the middle and get that to come out looking like a full picture of what you're trying to do. So that's where the puzzle concept came from. I have two boys that are both out of college, thank goodness. But when they were coming out of college, I was trying to explain to them how I've gone about job search for many years. And when I described it to them as a puzzle with a bunch of pieces, finally I saw these light bulbs go off and they understood what I was talking about. So that's what gave rise to this concept of the puzzle. So let's talk about what people typically do when they're going out to look for work. You go out and you put it together a resume, or maybe you better yet, or otherwise you go and find somebody to help you build a resume, maybe even pay somebody to build a resume. And then you have some references and you start applying online. I don't recommend that by any means. And I'll tell you that I've given this presentation several times in and around Austin and in other places. And I had a guy come up to me one time and said, I've sent in over 350 resumes and I don't understand I'm frustrated. I can't find any work. And I said, let me ask you a question. I'm going to guess that you got somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 responses to your 350 submittals. And I said, by responses, I mean, you got an email back that said, hey, thanks for submitting your resume, which is probably a generically, auto response type of thing. And I said, out of that, you maybe had conversations with 5 or less about the actual job you applied for. And he said, that's exactly right. How did you know? And I said, because that's the typical response rate for online submittals. And that's what typically most people are doing. And Indeed or any of these other online platforms will tell you, just submit your resume and employers will come find you. They might, it works. I mean, obviously people are getting jobs, but it might not work so well to get the job you want and or at the speed or pace you want. So I don't recommend doing anything with your resume or your references till the very end of this concept of formulating the pieces of the employment puzzle. So why is it important to us as people of our age and demographic group to do this? I'm 60. Someone in my age group will have changed jobs 7 times on average in their career. If that's not enough to make you think, okay, I got to be prepared, because 7 times, divided over a 30, 35 year, whatever length your career is, that's changing jobs fairly frequently. And so you want to have some systematic way or approach for it. But that statistic caught me. By the way, for millennials and younger people coming out of school right now, that number is now 15. They will change jobs 15 times. And that's largely because of the gig-based type economy. And so we all have to be prepared for the fact that you don't go into jobs and you're there for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. That's the exception and not the norm these days. So you want to have a way to quickly change and pivot, right? So let's talk about career pivots. I started out, if you discount the things I did when I was in high school and college, I started out in selling computers. I did that for a few years, and then I went into the professional audio industry. That's a career pivot. That's completely different from selling computers. From there, I went into the staffing and professional services, which Cindy referenced in my bio, and that I've done for 20 years. So I've pivoted careers pretty much right along, and I've changed jobs, companies more often in there. But the average is you're going to have 3 career pivots where you do something completely different. And that's where I think this employment puzzle process really helps people, because it helps them to clearly define not only who they are, but who are they trying to approach, and convince that, yeah, well, I haven't done that yet, but all these skills I have over here, I can drag them over and drop them right into the job that you have and be effective. So you have to have a way to tell your story to do a career pivot. And that's where we get into what are the three main questions around this employment puzzle concept. The first is who's in your network. Like Cindy said, networking to me is the core of finding a job. And I was telling her and Natalie a story before you all joined that somebody I worked with 20 years ago called me up, and I'm currently looking for work myself, called me up about a week or two ago and said, I'm working for this company. They're looking to hire someone in Texas. I know you live in Texas. Would you be interested? And that's purely from maintaining a network of a coworker from 20 years ago. So it works if you do this and you maintain a good solid network, but not only maintain who you already know, but kind of build upon that as you go along. The next question you need to ask yourself is, what is your story? What do you do? What do you do well? What do you like to do? And network and story kind of work together to feed off of each other. And in the third question you need to ask, it's what value do you bring to an employer? And your story and your value to the employer definitely work off each other, and your value and your network work off each other. So in this Venn diagram, all these things are important. These questions that you need to answer by going through each of the puzzle pieces, and the interrelationships start to become clearer. And what happens is, if you really focus on all of this, and it's not easy, it's not something you're going to do like in an evening and then you got it and you're ready to go. It will take several days, maybe even weeks of work to build this all out so that you have a clear approach to your job search. But you will end up finding your job, what you're looking for, what you want to do. And you'll notice in all of these, the word that's underlined is you. Your job search is important to you. It's about you. It's about what you want to do. Again, I'm not going to completely discount the fact, though, that you do need to focus on what the employer wants too, because it can be all about you, but if you're not giving them what they want to, you'll never get the job. So I look at it as kind of a scale. If we rewind back to the beginning of this presentation and we just focus on the references and the resume, and we submit that to an employer online, you're basically tipping the scales in their favor. Because what's happening is those resumes are coming in. HR is overwhelmed with the volume of respondents to jobs that are posted. And so they use tools, applicant tracking systems and those types of things to try to get a resume to float to the top. So that's what you're doing, is you're lumping yourself in with maybe 50, 100, 1,000, depending upon the type of jobs it is, other candidates who may or may not be taking the steps I'm about to tell you about that help their resume to float to the top. And if they get 50 resumes, they're probably only going to talk to 5 people maybe and see if they can sort it out of those 50 resumes. So your chances are slim. That's why this guy submitted 350 resumes and only got 5 meaningful responses. But if you start to build out your network, if you clearly understand and can reflect and tell people what your story is, and you understand the value that an employer or a type of employer is seeking, then basically you're tipping that scale back over in your favor, because now you're being more targeted about your job search and who you want to go after and who you can get to be interested in you a lot quicker than an online submittal will ever render, timing-wise. So let's start and focus with the first question: who's in your network? So it's a puzzle, it's a jigsaw puzzle, right? So what are the most important pieces in a jigsaw puzzle? Well, when we do one, we dump them all out and on the table, flip them all over so you can see what's there. But almost inevitably, we go for the 4 corners. Whoops, hang on. we go for the corners, right? Those are the four most important pieces in a puzzle. If you can lay them out, and then you go for all the edge pieces, and then you start filling in the middle, it's a little easier approach to building a puzzle. And so that's exactly how we're going to do this. The four corners are your personal network, your professional network, your industry network, and your social network. So let's kind of focus on and talk about the first three. So what's your personal network? Your personal network is friends, family, might be church groups that you're a part of. It might be if you're involved in any kind of athletic endeavors, tennis, running, whatever it may be, the group of people that you spend time with there, or any kind of social activity that you spend time with other people on. I know that's probably not been the norm so much over the last several months, but hopefully it will be the norm again. And it definitely renders good personal network contacts. And then I often give this in front of a room of people. And so I always say the person on your left and the person on your right. Right? So you may be in a room of people, and you can apply this to any situation. When I was doing this in Austin, I was doing it at job fairs and job clubs. And all those people are there for the same reason. They're trying to find work, and they want to figure out, how do I do this? And so you would be surprised how easy it is to network with those people, because you're all kind of in the same boat trying to get to the same destination. And if you just strike up a conversation, how much information you can gather from them and or share with them to help each other. So the next is your professional network. And probably not a surprise that consists of maybe your current supervisors or current coworkers, if you are currently working, or your former supervisors or former coworkers. I gave you an example of that just a little while ago. This former coworker of mine, just out of the blue, reached out to me and said, here's an opportunity. Are you interested? Now, that's not always how that works, but your former coworkers and former supervisors, there's no reason why you wouldn't, as soon as you're out looking for a job, go back to them and explain your situation and see whether they might have something that you would be interested in doing, or whether they might know of somebody that has something. This gentleman that called me has worked at 6 different companies, as have I, since we both parted ways 20 years ago from the company we were at. He knows a lot of people I don't know, and I know a lot of people he doesn't know, and you'd be surprised what comes out of that. So don't discount either current or former coworkers and supervisors. Professors, some of you may have, I've been out of college probably too long to remember the names of my professors, let alone get a hold of them. But some of you may have taken some ACC courses, or maybe a UT continuing education course or something along these lines. There's a lot of these boot camps for programming and that sort of thing in and around Austin. And if you've done that and you've had a professor, those people are usually, especially in the continuing education space, they're people who are doing that as a side gig to whatever they normally do. And they also have worked around Austin in that same industry, so they probably know a lot of people at different places. They're excellent contacts for networking. This kind of goes hand in hand with that. Trainers and educators, maybe it wasn't a formal college course, but just some sort of continuing education, or even a 2 or 3 day course on something. Those people often don't do that as their full-time job, and they have a lot of network contacts. And then I say any professional, if you run across somebody who's a professional in a group or industry that you would want to be involved in, they would make a good professional network contact. And they kind of cross over into what I'll talk about next, the next corner piece, which is the industry network contacts. So meetup groups are kind of, they've changed their dynamic a little bit. I mean, you know, we used to do some of these types of presentations in a room with a bunch of people in there. Now we're doing them all virtually. It doesn't mean that meetup groups have gone away. They've just changed the technology involved in how they deliver their message. So if you see a meetup group, whether it's meeting in person or whether it's meeting virtually, that is in the industry that you're interested in, you should join up and be a part of that and try to attend those things. You'll make contacts and you'll learn about what's going on in the industry. So professional meetup groups. An example of this is, I know in Austin, there's a Java programmers meetup group. There's a meetup group for people who are in the engineering field, electrical engineering. There's probably a real estate meetup group. There's a variety of different meetup groups of people who are in a profession or career, and you want to seek those out. They're slightly different from an industry group because engineers might be engineers who work in a variety of different industries. Whereas if you're working in the medical field, that's an industry meetup group, people that meet up and just talk about medical field issues. And industry thought leaders are good network contacts. And it may be that you're just gleaning information from them. And so what I typically say there is utilize things like social media to engage those thought leaders on platforms that they use that fit whatever your chosen industry or profession is. I think an example of that would be, you know, there are podcasts that I'm always interested in the electric power industry, and there are podcasts based around the electric power industry. I don't know the person that puts on that podcast, but I've got them on my contact list. And maybe one day I might get to know them or get to speak with them, because if I watch and see what they're doing on social media and posting out on different platforms, and maybe they see or say something that I respond to, eventually, as they see your name pop up over and over, you might be in a better position to reach out to them and make them an industry contact, make them a professional contact. And that will go a long way. But those types of thought leader contacts, unless you happen to just fortunately know who that thought leader is and have access to them, those might take a little longer to build those contacts, but it's absolutely worth doing. So what do I do with all these types of contacts? I actually create this network contact list in an Excel spreadsheet. You can do it in any form or fashion you want, or any tool that you want. But this is where I take down their email, their name, the company they're at. Maybe if they've been at several companies, I might list a few of them, what their current title is. I'll put links to their social media accounts in there. This is how you could kind of keep up with them on social media. And then I might put some relevant facts like the school they were at, where they're located, and if I have it, the phone number. You don't have to record exactly these particular things, but whatever you feel like you need to have for information. It could be way more than this. You can make it as extensive as you want. But you'll see down here at the bottom, there's these 3 tabs: professional, personal, and industry. So this is just a screenshot, so I can't do it here, but I could flip through these and come up with, extensive lists of names. This is just a sampling. I think each one of my lists has at least 100 contacts, if not more, on it. So it's important to keep that list, because this will build over time, and you want to be able to refer back to it at the moment you find yourself in a position where either you want to change jobs or you don't have a job and you need to find another job. The first thing you'll do is go down through this list and touch base with every single one of these people and just describe what your situation is, hopefully be able to clearly tell them your story and see if they can provide any help or assistance. So you'll notice that I did not, there's one corner piece missing, and that's social network. That's kind of by design. It is a network, no doubt. It's a little different from the others. The others are actually physically, contacts, names of people that you might be able to reach out to. Your social network is different. You're just building out a presence in social networks and social media. I know that this is probably not, well, whenever I give this, particularly to our age group, it's met with mixed results. And it's probably even worse now when you see some of the headlines going on with, Facebook and Instagram and all the things that they own and control. But the importance of having a presence is not about you're actively engaged. It's just about having the presence. And let me explain that. So you want to use your personal branding information to update your preferred social media profiles. Now, personal branding kind of makes people cringe too, but it also is important. I underlined it because we're actually going to review it in the next section we talk about, which is what is your story. So I won't dive into that now. For now, we're just going to talk about social media profiles. So this includes things like LinkedIn. Now, if you're a professional and you're looking for a professional job, you probably should, if you don't already, have a profile on LinkedIn. I think that's pretty common knowledge and pretty acceptable right now. So most people I don't think that's going to catch you by surprise. You might also want to have a profile on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. Do you need to have one on all four of these? Not necessarily. Do you want to have one on at least two and maybe three? I would say yes. And the key to it is that you are consistent across whatever platforms you choose to be on. And here's the reason for being on multiples. This is a slightly outdated slide because this profile up here, this is all my stuff. And this profile up here is Google, which, as Google's prone to do, they just sort of went away one day. Here's my Facebook. Here's my Twitter and my LinkedIn. So if you notice, the pictures are almost the same. These three actually are exactly the same. This one's the same day I just took my jacket off. A little more casual for Facebook, right? And then these descriptions here of being a business development and talent acquisition professional are the same across all of them. The reason for this is and particularly if you're Jane Smith or Bob Jones, or you have a very common name, there's algorithms out on the internet that aggregate information that's available out there to anyone who's trying to search. And if you don't know this already, any recruiter who's looking for or looking at your information will go look for your LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter profiles to see if they can build a profile on you of who you are, what type of person you are, before they even contact you. So what this does is this forces the algorithms to look at this and go, oh, look, there's 4 different profiles. All the text is the same. All the pictures are mostly the same. I mean, they have face recognition, right? So they're going to recognize that even though I don't have the jacket on in the one picture, that the face is the same. And the algorithm will then say, all right, I'm pretty confident that that's Chip Sampson, so I'm going to bubble that one up to the top. And again, the reason for having multiple profiles and consistency across them is when they go to do that search on you, they're going to find that. It's going to pop up for them, and it will be you. It won't be some other Bob Jones or some other Jane Smith. And you get to control the narrative and the image of what you want to put out there. And for anyone who's hesitant about going across several platforms of social media, let me tell you, I do very little on Facebook. I obviously do nothing on Google anymore. I think I've maybe done 2 Twitter posts. LinkedIn I use much more extensively. That, to me, that's the key resource for a professional. But I have these others because it creates a consistent profile for me and elevates my name to the top of a search, typically, when someone searches my name. And you want to do the same for yourself. So I'll get off that horse about social media. And let's talk about what is your story. So we've covered, who's in your network. Now let's look at what is your story. And this is where we're going to get into the personal branding piece. So you need to create a brand statement. Oh, great. Wonderful. What's that? How do I do that? How does that work? There's a few things. I'll tell you the way I did it, and you can use these same steps, or maybe you can come up with some on your own if you do a little research on personal branding. There are people out there, by the way, that you can pay to help you do your personal brand. But I think it's doable by yourself. It's just takes some work. You want to do personal assessments, and I would suggest you do a couple of them. There's things like StrengthsFinder that you've probably heard of, or Standout 2.0, 16 personalities. There's actually dozens of these that you can use. These are 3 of the more common ones. I would suggest that you do at least 2 and maybe 3. Each one uses slightly different questioning and slightly different algorithms, but the more you do, the more consistent a picture you're going to get reflected back to you of what these personal assessment tools do. And it's surprising, if you're honest with yourself, they're pretty close to on track with creating a profile for who you are. And then the other thing that you can do is seek the opinions of others. This one's a little more difficult. And I say that because most people don't like to talk about or brag about themselves, or even, say to somebody, hey, tell me what you think of me. But that's exactly what this is. It's saying, tell me what you think of me. But not in that open-ended a fashion. It's a little more targeted. Maybe tell me what you think of me when you think of my professional skills, tell me what you think I'm good at. And you might ask friends, you might ask family, you might ask coworkers. I would suggest you ask all. And it's uncomfortable to do this. I connected with 20 different people and asked them to give me very specific feedback about myself before I came up with a picture. But what it did is it told me how a potential employer probably sees me and how I come across. And there were some things I thought, yeah, that seems right. And there were other things I thought, really, do I come across like that? You want to know those things, because you either need to work on the negative things that you put out there, or focus on the positive things that you put out there that you might not even have thought that you do. And the way that I did this is I stumbled across, I love to research and do things on the internet. And I stumbled across this book called Career Cred by Ryan Roten. It's R-H-O-T-E-N, I think. It's a fantastic book. It's a pretty quick read. It's basically a workbook that tells you how to go about seeking the opinions of others and to understand what is your career credibility factor. I mean, what are you really good at? And you can clearly put out there across to other people. And if you go through this book and go through these exercises, you'll come out with a really clear picture of, kind of who you are, what you do well, which is very important. You have to understand your story in order to connect with the right employers. So let's move on to the second piece of what is your story. It's a little more straightforward. It's the skills inventory. And again, I do a skills inventory in a spreadsheet. I know that's very small text and you can't read it, but I'll tell you what it consists of are things like executive summaries, your technical skills, achievements you might have had in different jobs, accomplishments in community service that you've done, your positions that you've held, education and training that you've received, interests that you might have, some soft skills that you feel like you have. A lot of that will come out of your questioning of other people about what you do and what you do well. And you want to make sure you capture all this in the skills inventory and have it written down. Now, this applies to everything. My first job was working in a cemetery where I mowed lawns and trimmed hedges mostly, but occasionally, had to participate in the funeral service process. Those skills are in there. I hope I never have to use them again. They'll probably get used on me sometime down the road, but they're in there because I've done that. And maybe I go apply for a job where they want to know if I know how to use a shovel. Well, I do. So anyway, put it all in there because I look at this as like an Amazon warehouse. If you think about an Amazon warehouse, so you've seen them, you've seen the one down in San Marcos, it's huge. There's everything in there. None of what's in there is of any value to you until you've placed the order on Amazon and said, I want that one thing. And then they go pick that off the shelf, they package it up and they send it to you. And you're happy because you've received exactly what you wanted. Well, it's no different with an employer. They have a job they're trying to fill and a set of skills they're after. And if you're not honed in on what those skills are, and you submit a resume to them, particularly one you've had built by somebody else that says, here, this ought to do it for you. You're not necessarily going to deliver to their doorstep what they're looking for. But if you keep your Amazon warehouse, your skills inventory completely populated, now when you're looking at a job description and you say, oh, they said they wanted this particular skill, this leadership skill. Oh yeah, let me go back in my skills inventory and see, did I do that somewhere and can I plug that into my resume because it's not currently on the version of the resume I have. And if you try to remember things you did 20 years ago on the spur of the moment to be able to fill out a resume and submit it, you'll drive yourself nuts. If you keep an inventory, you'll be able to just go to it and say, yep, it's on that shelf. I'm pulling it off and putting it in my resume. And you're being true to yourself because you know it's a skill you did and you can put it in there and you can speak to it in an interview. So that's what's your story. So we did who's in your network, what's your story. Now we're going to focus on what value do you bring. And that has to do with doing things like industry and job research. You need to read and learn about industry trends if you want to go into a particular industry or if you're in a particular industry. This is incredibly important if you're trying to pivot your career in any form or fashion. And if you remember, we said, it's likely you're going to pivot a few times. And you may be at the point where, hey, I've done all this other stuff for 15, 20, 30 years. I need a job, but maybe I want to do something completely different. How do I bring those skills over to something different? You have to understand the industry. So subscribe to industry blogs and podcasts and listen to what people are talking about in that industry and listen to it with kind of an ear of thinking, how do I use my skills in what they're trying to accomplish over here? Attend trade shows if and when you can. And then do job research on the particular type of job you're interested in and looking for. And the way I do job research is if I know I want to be a project manager, then I'm going to go out and find at least 6 examples, maybe more like a dozen, of project manager jobs that seem to fit what I think I want to do. And I take those and I plug them, I deconstruct them to determine the keywords that are consistent throughout all those dozen different job descriptions. I put them in what's called a word cloud, which you can do at wordclouds.com or at wordle.net, I think is the other one. And you've probably all seen a word cloud before. So I plug all 12 job descriptions into one document, go to word clouds and say, create a word cloud for this. And it will show me graphically on here the words that show up the most often. So now I know that in my skills inventory and in my resume, I need to use the exact kind of words that are popping up in these job descriptions: leadership, goals, building, planning, manage, performance. And it's really best, if you can, to use them exactly the way they show up here, because if you are in a situation where your resume is being scanned by a tracking tool, and even if you're networked into a position, it almost always will go through a tracking tool at some point. It will help it to float up to the top because it's looking for keyword matches and they're in there. So use this tool and jobs that you're interested in to get a resume that matches better with what the company is looking for. And then you need to do company research. So you've done your industry and job research. You now know what industry I want to work in and what type of jobs I want to work in that industry. Now focus on who are the companies that are in there, right? Who's doing that? And make a list of companies that you want to target. And then begin to use LinkedIn and other tools to identify individuals that work inside that company, and when and if it's appropriate, engage them on those platforms, either by just responding to things they post or eventually reaching out to them and saying you'd like to see if they have time to meet or talk. It's a delicate balance to get there. You can't just like fire off an email and say, hey, I just saw your profile and I'd like to meet for coffee. When can you do that? They have no idea who you are. But if they post a couple of articles and you say, hey, I really like this article, especially the part where it did this or said that, maybe they respond back, or maybe you just thank them for putting it out there. You do that once or twice, and then you reach out and ask if you can connect with them either over the phone or over a meeting. You will have a significantly higher success rate in doing that. You won't always be successful, but you'll have a higher success rate. And I say not HR unless you know them. As I said earlier, HR is just overwhelmed with paper and paperwork and resumes, things coming across their desk and scheduling interviews. They're not nearly as interested in taking the time to understand you as a candidate as the manager who's actually hiring you would be. So you want to network with the manager and send whatever information is required to HR. HR's job is to fill the position. Once they fill one, they can move on to the next one. So they're a little less focused on taking care of you individually and more focused on, I got all this paper, how do I jam it into one position? Anyway, add those key players that you identify through your LinkedIn research into your network lists and begin trying to find ways to network them. Maybe they reference a meetup group that they're a part of. Go to that meetup group and see if you can meet them there. And then questions to answer and questions to ask will be the next things. So you've done all this research. You know you're going to be asked questions in an interview. Maybe you've submitted some resumes at this point because you're honed in and targeted in on what you want to do, but there's some downtime in between there, and you're going to be asked questions. So you need to prepare answers for the following types of questions. Specific skill questions. These come out of the job description. If it's a project manager, tell me about your experience with MS Project or Slack or whatever tool they're using to manage their projects. Write that question down and write out your answer to it. Behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when you worked with a difficult coworker. How did you deal with that? Tell me about a time when you failed. You should have a failure story that you can turn into a success story at the end of your answer. Tell me about some of your best successes in your career. Have these questions all written down, and you can look up behavioral questions on the internet and see what types of questions these are. You've probably been asked them in interviews, but have your answers written out. And then off the wall questions, it's really hard to prepare for. I always like the one where engineers are asked, why are manhole covers round? Who cares? Why would you ever think about that? But sometimes you get asked these bizarre questions. And the way I like to handle a bizarre question is to answer that question with a question and say, wow, that's a really interesting question. I can't say that I've really thought about why manhole covers are round, but maybe to help me understand a little better, you could tell me why are manhole covers and the shape of manhole covers important to this engineering position that I'm trying to get. And they might explain that further, or they might say, it's not important, just answer the question. And so you buy yourself some time to answer that question. But rehearse your answers until fluid. And I say this, an Academy Award-winning actor or actress does not win that award by reading the script once, jumping in front of the camera, and then perfectly delivering those lines. They rehearse those lines over and over thousands of times and think about the inflection, maybe pauses, the delivery of those, and maybe alternate ways to deliver a line before they ever get in front of the camera and the director shouts action. And that's essentially what this is. It's not saying that you're putting on a performance in an interview. You're just trying to come across as solid a candidate as you know you already are, and you want them to perceive you as. So if I have not been clear in what I just said on that last point, I'm going to put it in big letters and say, rehearse your answers until fluid. This is the one piece of the puzzle that I think most people skimp on. They say, well, I'll just, I'm pretty confident. I'll just answer the questions in the interview. I've interviewed thousands of people, and I can tell you, I instantly recognize when someone has done this and prepared well, and it only happens in less than 10% of the candidates I interview, probably even a smaller number than that. And those are always the people I want to hire. So I encourage you to take this part of this questions to answer seriously. And then the last one is questions to ask. Never get to the end of the interview and they say, do you have any questions to ask us? And say, no, I think you've covered everything. Almost never will I hire that person, because it shows me that they haven't really done much research and tried to learn about the company, because as much as the company wants to know about you and who you are to hire you, I would hope that you're just as curious about the company and the job we're going to ask you to do, to have done a little research and have some questions that you need some clarification on. So have at least a dozen questions and make them specific and pointed based on your research. Reflect what you've learned and uncovered. And oops, I'm going to back up. And I'm going to say a dozen because it's very possible that at least half of your questions that you write up, they're going to already ask or cover in the interview process of the questions they're asking you, or in their responses. And so you want to make sure you have enough questions left over so that you don't want to ask a question that's already been covered in the interview just because it's on your list. You want to make sure you're asking them a fresh question that is, as I said, specific and pointed and reflects the research. So if you do all these things that we talked about, if you understand who's in your network and work your network, if you understand your story and you understand your value and you throw all that into the funnel, what comes out at the bottom is your job. You'll notice I haven't talked at all about resume or references. And I know we're running tight on time. I guess I kind of got rambling on this. And so I'm going to kind of breeze through this because I think you all know what you need to do here. but references you want to use in the following order of importance. Professional references first and always, current and former supervisors. Those are the people that you worked for, whose job was on the line. If you didn't do a good job, those are the ones, hopefully, that are going to speak your highest praise for the work that you did. You may have a situation where you had a bad relationship with a supervisor. You don't need to use them. Hopefully you have enough good ones that you can. If you don't, then you can go to current and former coworkers. I'll tell you, when I talk to a coworker, it's almost very clear to me that they're just saying anything they can positive because they worked with you and they're your friend or buddy. Whereas a supervisor has a little bit more vested interest in answering the question, answering the questions you're asking more accurately. So they're stronger references. Professors can be good references, particularly if you had just gone through a course and you did really well in it. They could speak highly of your skills and where you're trying to go. And any professional who can speak to your work product or your work ethic. The last group that you would want to use are personal references, which is friends, maybe a friend with a professional background. It's okay to do that, but if they're a friend, they're sort of doing you a favor. It's not as meaningful as a supervisor. Maybe church members or longtime family friends. And the last thing is the resume. The resume, you want to have more than one version of your resume, and this is all drawn from your skills inventory. As an example, maybe you were a project coordinator for many years and you want to be a project manager, but realistically, you really just need to find work. So you might have both a project coordinator version and a project manager version that you can use and take information from your skills inventory to populate the resume, either or version, depending on the job you're after, with the specific information that's appropriate to the job that you're applying for. And then track the submittals of each version of your resume. If you submit 15, 20 resumes to different places and you've tweaked each one, which you should, I highly suggest you tweak it for the specific job, then you're going to want to track that again, I do it in a spreadsheet, and I actually put a link to that version of that resume, because you don't want to submit something in 3 weeks, a month later, when they call you back, have to remember which one did I submit to them. Another way of doing this is to name them specifically, your resume, the name of the company, and the date. That's a way to just track it in just your regular file structure as to which one you submitted to them. But you don't want to be in the interview and looking at a different version of the resume than what they have in front of them, because you can get tripped up on that. And I've seen it happen. So that's it. That's the employment puzzle. That's all the pieces put together. That's the view and the vision you get, right? If you go through all of these steps. It's a lot of work. I'm going to put up a slide of how to contact me if you want to. Actually, this website I just discovered right before this, and I meant to take it out. I thought I did, but I guess I didn't hit save. Might be slightly compromised at the moment. So I've had an issue with Google. I had all these files in 3 different Google accounts, and I managed to recover one of them last night, but this one I'm still working on. Google changed something in the last couple weeks, and now I can't get directly to this. I have to go an indirect route. So don't use the website, but feel free to email me, and this is probably the best right now, at chip@employmentpuzzle.com. If you have any questions about this presentation, if you want to get a copy of these slides, and I'll send it to you, or I do also have an online course that I won't go into any real detail here, but I'll tell you, if you're interested in it, we can talk about it. Just send me an email, say you'd like to learn more about it, and I'll take 15, 20 minutes and go over it with you in a separate conversation.
Excellent. Chip, that was awesome information. I know right now we're going through a hiring for our own position at Austin Up. And so we've gotten to live through some of these things that you're talking about, being able to look at those people as they're interviewing and assessing some of the information, that you're saying you should do. You do look at that, when you're looking for a new hire.
Sure.
And yeah, I think it's really interesting information. It's always timely. We are just so happy that you were able to come here and speak today. We appreciate you so much. I'm looking right now in the chat. I don't see anybody who has any questions in the chat, but Natalie, if you wouldn't mind, will you let everybody come on the screen and they can ask their questions or whatever they'd like to do? And at this time, Chip, would you mind taking unpresenting so that we're all, go ahead and unpresent. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have some people pop in, and anybody, we've got just a couple minutes. If you have any questions, this would be the time to ask the question. If you don't have any questions, it's probably because Chip did such a great job.
I don't ever think that's the case.
Well, I learned up to the Jigsaw.
Might be because they're all asleep and there they left.
Well, one thing I was thinking about, and I love what I do. I've been a realtor for 20 years. I can't imagine changing what I do, but there have been a couple times when a job came open and I was like, that job sounds fabulous.
Sure.
It is a terrible scramble to try to put together your work history or your volunteer history or, the other experiences that you have. So I really liked it when you said you should keep a running resume going. So when you're ready, it's not like, now, when did I work for Microsoft and how many years did I work for them? And, you just have it there and you're ready to go.
And I'm sure other people have found themselves in this situation. You have a job that you want to apply for and they ask you to send a resume. And now you like agonize and stay up all night long trying to think of, when did I do this? What did I do that? Whereas if you have this inventory, if I get something like that, I'll pull up what I think is the closest version to the fit for what they're looking for. And then I have their job description up on the screen. And then I have my skills inventory up on the screen. And I'll just go down through line by line and say, okay, they asked for this. Is that in that version of the resume? No. Okay. Do I have it in my skills inventory? Yes. Let me put it over there. Mm-hmm. They asked for this. They didn't, or this is in my resume. They didn't even ask for it. I'll just take that out of my resume.
Mm-hmm. And why you can have it be in there. Yeah.
I basically build it on the fly. And I can build what is a pretty decent resume for a specific job in an hour and send it off.
It hurts your head going back to the 80s, so I think it's a great idea to keep that going. I don't see any other questions in here, but I did want to say that we have a December event that we're working on right now. We're going to be working with Austin Community College, and they're going to come on. And one of the topics that we want to talk about, which we haven't firmed up, but one of the topics we're going to talk about is where are the jobs? Where are the jobs right now? So I think that will be extremely interesting to see. We have so many companies who are moving here and we're learning so much, just about the employment industry. Being volunteers for Austin Up, we're constantly being provided information about job opportunities and places that people can go to improve their job skills. And it's really exciting. It's fulfilling. And thank you so much, Chip, for being here. And I think we're ready to sign off.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
I hope it's helpful.
It was awesome. Thank you, Chip.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.